As I had only discovered very, very recently that I would be speaking before you today, I think my presentation is going to be largely anecdotal and off the cuff. And I'm just going to share some reflections with you of the 18 months I recently spent in Iran leading up to February of 2009. I can hope that these observations and thoughts that I share prove to be useful, keeping in mind that I am an Iranian American, so I possess both the advantages and the limitations of my perspective. So further, I will not be drawing too many conclusions for you, as I hope that my words trigger more debate versus the adoption of some absolutes. Like many people who visit Iran from abroad, my previous times, as I would visit as a younger child, I mainly stayed with family members. Unlike many expats, the family members that I would stay with were devoutly religious, so my activities were very wholesome. I would be taken out for ice cream, and I'd go to Meiduna Hafiz in midday, and we'd go to the museums. I never was outside after 9 o'clock. There wasn't even a good mehuni I could go to or a party. So, but I know when I wasn't there, my male and female cousins would go out, but my uncle considered my safety, I think, a matter of national security. So I wasn't really allowed to move around too much. Needless to say, in those times, I fully experienced the domestic sphere and the amazing food that comes with it. But on my last visit, I hedged this domesticity a little bit in favor of living on my own, which is something of an anomaly for a single woman within Tehran, considering that the neighbors must be very understanding or paid off. So thankfully they were understanding. So while living in Ekbatan, I lived in a huge apartment complex called Ekbatan by Azadi Square, and I managed to kind of break into the bustling, defiant community that was around me. So I can say that when I did break in, my first challenges were twofold. It was language and sexual politics. I speak Farsi, Persian, fluently, but the language was a challenge because this was not my parents' Farsi. It was not, there was no bale, merci, chash, thank you, no, absolutely, galat kardam, my mistake. This was a dense language of slang amongst my peers. It often, because I lacked the ability to grasp the slang, it often led to my inability to also grasp the sexual politics and nuances. So initially I was really uncomfortable a lot of the times within the Iranian sexual sphere because it seemed that every look, gesture, and word and empty space alluded to sex. However, upon reflection, I'm realizing, well, it's not extraordinary that these youths would be fascinated by sexuality, as the Islamic Republic sexualizes men and women from a fairly young age. I think it's human instinct to become obsessed with what is so carefully covered and controlled, whether or not you abide by the rules. But by the time I became fully immersed and kind of unraveled the slang, I was fairly comfortable with the evolving rules and the continual foreplay between men and women within Tehran. I can say that the overarching observation is that these codes of words not only help you flirt, but they're also a form of defiant protest, circumventing these strict political and social codes. What also compounded me by the slang was that it was used from Jordan to Aliabad, which means that it crossed socioeconomic and cultural barriers, that it was all over town. I mean, each neighborhood may have even had a variation on the slang, but everyone had this code of words. So I think in a sense it was about being defiant, but it was also about wanting to be unique. And not because you weren't allowed to be different, but because you just wanted to be. And I believe that that's a significant distinction, that although the language is birthed out of circumvention, it's not an adoption of an outside world. It's a reflection of any young generation that wants to pioneer their own path. And And what makes them extraordinary is that these are a generation of Iranians that live under a construct that discourages subculture. But no amount of indoctrination seems to quell the individualistic natures of my peers. So although they're constantly trying to squash these subcultures, 10 more sprout up. And it's very interesting. I feel like within Tehran, there's about 20 different worlds. Recently, I had a conversation with my dear friend and fellow panelist, Bita Mostofi, about the 1 million signatures campaign. It's a highly decentralized action that has been initiated and continued by many of my sisters. In fact, one of the most active members of this campaign, Atiya Yousefi, was taken in by authorities on December 27th while assisting a severely beaten young man. To this day, her family has yet to see her, which is extremely unfortunate and disturbing to me. I often think of her and people like her that are within Evin right now. But Bita and I discussed the creative and innovative methods of women like Atiya. They initiated these methods to challenge outrageous restrictions under which men and women function. We were discussing how one method was to go into a public space, like a coffee shop, and begin a conversation really loudly. And it would be a form of kind of street theater. So you would engage in a topic such as divorce, and you would talk about how you can't get custody of your kids, or how you can't even initiate the divorce proceedings itself, or you're not going to get any property. And because of the nature of the Iranian community, you're loud, and so, there's people around you, and they're kind of getting curious, and they start giving their opinions about what you're saying. Eva khaher, pes in karo bokon, which means, come on, you could do this or you could do that, and passerbys would kind of start engaging in this dialogue, and before you knew it, you had people that wouldn't normally be talking about this topic publicly were in the public sphere as something that you should be kind of ashamed of and shouldn't speak about, and it was out there. And that's, to me, so incredibly innovative and interesting. And so when we were discussing this, I realized, well, when I was in Iran and I was there, I was doing this all the time, organically, with my friends, and a lot of whom were musicians and artists and entrepreneurs and critics, with different ideas of their own. But we would, for example, be in a public space, and we had this instinct to bring out into the public sphere what's thought to be private. So we'd kind of laugh a little louder than usual, or spoke more brashly and loudly and passionately when we talk about arts and politics. And depending on where we were, we would either draw some laughter or kind of looks of embarrassment or judgment, but people were hearing us. And it wasn't done too consciously, but I think on some level, on a subconscious level, we knew what we were doing. We knew we were kind of pressing buttons, and there was a slight glee in that as well. So I feel like, much like many of the youth that are in Iran's urban centers, we found playing with the unpredictable boundaries of the government forces as irresistible, because the rules seem to be shifting and changing all the time. You could kind of push and then hold back, and push a little bit and then hold back. And this game that we played, every time we were able to get away with it, it became a little more delicious. And so the boundary was pushed further and further, which probably resulted in me getting arrested last February. So, it doesn't end well sometimes. But that game